A low metallic groan reverberated through the sleeping quarters just before dawn. It wasn't the usual mechanical hum that blanketed the offshore rig like a second skin. It was deeper, angrier, like the ocean itself had awakened and wanted to be heard. Chief Rig Manager Cole Danner sat upright in his bunk before the noise faded. 40 years at sea had honed his instincts sharper than any radar, and something told him today wasn't going to follow protocol. He swung his legs onto the cold metal floor and glanced at the flickering wall monitor. Wind speeds had doubled overnight. The storm they'd tracked all week had changed course. It was coming straight for them. On deck 4, just above the drill control room, engineer Sarah Kent flipped through diagnostic logs on her tablet. 28, whip-smart, and carrying a master's degree in offshore petroleum systems, she was the youngest among the crew, but had already earned her place with problem-solving skills that bordered on clairvoyant. She had just noticed an unusual spike in one of the ballast tanks when the overhead speaker crackled. "All hands, report to stations. Secure all equipment topside. Storm alert upgraded to critical." The words dropped like weights into the room. Sarah set her tablet down, took a steadying breath, and reached for her hard hat. By mid-morning, the rig was a hive of motion. Bulkhead doors clanged shut, hydraulic drills locked into standby, and safety lines snapped taut across decks as men and women hurried to tie down anything that could turn into a projectile. From the bridge, Danner oversaw it all through reinforced glass, flanked by a pair of monitors feeding live satellite imagery and system readouts. The storm, now a Category 4, was gaining strength with unusual speed. Waves had already surpassed 30 feet and were growing. Down in the galley, laughter had vanished. Conversations were short, clipped, only essential. Even the cook, Big Harris, known for his dark humor and habit of playing jazz during lunch prep, was silent, chopping carrots in rhythm with the distant crash of waves against steel. The safety officer, Marcus Hale, paced through every floor, double-checking hatches, comms relays, and escape routes. A former Navy petty officer with a reputation for paranoia, he'd always believed the rig's emergency drills weren't enough. "Steel floats until it doesn't," he'd once muttered after a minor flooding scare. Now he stopped outside the auxiliary generator room and frowned. The door hadn't latched properly. He locked it and noted the oversight in his report. By noon, the wind was screaming. The sea outside had turned a sickly gray like molten lead whipped into fury. Rain lashed the rig sideways, soaking the crew even beneath overhangs. Despite the chaos, Danner refused to authorize evacuation. Helicopters couldn't fly in this weather, and shutting down the entire rig would cost millions. The company, far away in Houston, had left the final call up to him, and Danner, wary, proud, maybe even a bit stubborn, had made it. "Keep drilling halted, but we ride it out," he said into the mic. "Stick to your zones, no heroes. We've trained for worse." No one replied, but all over the rig, glances were exchanged. They'd trained, yes. But theory and reality often danced to different tunes. As the storm made its final approach, a young deckhand named Tyler, a recent hire on his first deployment, stood outside the tool shed, clinging to a rail. He stared into the swirling dark, awestruck. The wave he saw building in the distance wasn't on any training manual. It wasn't a wave at all. It was a wall. "Tyler, move!" Sarah's voice broke his trance. She yanked him into the corridor as the first of the monster waves slammed into the rig. The entire structure groaned as if punched by a titan. Inside, lights flickered. Several storage bins tore free from their bolts and clattered down stairwells. Alarm sirens, triggered by pressure sensors, wailed in unison. In the command room, Danner gripped the console as the structure listed 5 degrees off-center. Just for a second, but enough to turn stomachs and widen eyes. A ballast tank had taken on water. If it wasn't pumped out fast, they'd tilt further, dangerously. "Sarah, we need that manual override on Tank 3 now," he ordered through the comm. "I'm on it," came her steady reply. A half deck below, she moved like muscle memory, boots pounding against grated steel, wrench in hand, console panels lighting her way. She reached the valve control room just as another wave thundered past. This time the lights didn't flicker. They went out. Complete darkness swallowed her, broken only by the red glow of the emergency beacon behind her. Sarah froze. She knew the layout, but another surge might throw her into the wall of pressure gauges and pipes ahead. She edged forward, hand trailing along the cold pipe until she found the manual lever. It took both hands to pull, the gears resisting with all the fury of the sea. Outside. When it finally gave, there was a jolt, then a hiss, and the ballast started to drain. One crisis, for now, was averted. Upstairs, Danner got the green light on his display. They were still upright. For now. Marcus Hale reached the control center with a soaked clipboard and mud on his boots. If the storm holds another 3 hours, we'll need to rotate crews. Exhaustion's setting in. I know, Danner said, rubbing his forehead. But if we can hold that time, we'll clear the worst of it. Outside, another blast of wind howled against the steel exoskeleton, bending cables and shaking antennas. The rig swayed but held. For the moment, it was enough. But below deck, unseen, a faint trickle of seawater had begun to creep into the lowest compartment. A crack in the welding seam, not wide, but persistent. No alarm had triggered yet. No red lights blinked. Just the cold certainty of water claiming space where it shouldn't. And above, as the crew regrouped for their next watch, the storm hadn't finished speaking. By dusk, the storm was no longer just a meteorological event. It was a siege. Wind gusts exceeding 100 knots whipped across the deck, tearing free tarps and slamming unsecured doors like gunshots echoing across the sea. Inside the operations room, the tension was thicker than the humidity. Cole Danner stared at the system monitors, watching the water level in subsection C 2 inches higher. The automated pumps were engaged, but they were slow, and now the backflow valve had jammed. It was a small problem in calm seas. Today, it was a possible death sentence. Sarah Kent re-entered the control center, soaked to the bone and shaking from her manual override in the ballast chamber. Despite her exhaustion, her mind was already racing through backup options. We can't just rely on the primary drainage system anymore. If we lose integrity in that compartment, we compromise the entire lower ballast array. Danner finished for her. He turned to Marcus Hale. Get down there. Patch it or reroute the intake. Hale nodded grimly, already unspooling tape from his gear belt. I'll take Thompson with me. He knows that grid better than anyone. Take an emergency transponder, Sarah added, handing him a blinking beacon. That section's readings have been inconsistent since the last hit. Don't count on comms. As Hale and Thompson disappeared into the corridor, the steel trembled beneath their feet. Somewhere far below, the rig moaned again, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from the bones of the platform itself. They all heard it. No one said a word. Below deck, the noise was louder, amplified by water echoing through drainage pipes and vibrating floor panels. Hale kept his eyes on the utility map, flashlight cutting narrow paths through the darkness. Thompson, younger and less experienced, followed closely behind, jaw clenched, fingers twitching near his tool pouch. I thought these compartments were pressure-sealed, he muttered. They are, Hale said, without slowing. Until they're not. When they reached the breach point, the problem was worse than expected. Water was pooling in the recess near the pipe flange, seeping steadily from a thin vertical crack in the welding seam. Hale dropped to his knees and pressed a gloved hand to it. Cold, too cold. It's not fresh, he murmured. Salt water's in. He barked instructions at Thompson, who scrambled to retrieve a patch kit from his satchel. The fix wasn't complicated, but under pressure, nothing was easy. A sudden jolt shook the rig again, this time from a wave that hit with such force it knocked Hale off balance and sent a metal toolbox clattering down the corridor. Brace it! Hale yelled. The power flickered. Emergency lighting returned just in time to see another leak form half a meter from the first. Hale cursed under his breath. "This is spreading!" Up top, Sarah was recalculating stress loads on the ballast tanks, running simulations on what would happen if one entire section failed. "If they can't reinforce that hull crack, we'll be forced to flood another compartment to offset the shift." "That could cost us engine power," Danner said. "Better than capsizing," she replied. The dilemma was agonizing. They couldn't abandon the rig. Not in this storm. Evacuation helicopters were grounded. Lifeboats? Laughable. The seas outside would swallow them whole. Their only option was to endure, maintain structural integrity, and wait for the storm to weaken. Suddenly, the alarms blared again, this time a proximity alert. One of the support cranes had begun to tilt dangerously, its locking braces torn loose by the force of the waves. If it toppled, it could crash through the main deck and into the operations room itself. "Manual lock override!" Danner shouted, running for the deck panel. "I'll go," Sarah said, already moving. "No," he snapped. "I need you here." But she was gone before he could finish. On the storm-slicked upper deck, Sarah emerged into chaos. Rain lashed her face, and the crane swayed like a drunken giant, creaking above her. She bolted toward the override console, boots sliding on the flooded steel. With every second, the structure tilted further. Below, the crew watched on internal monitors, helpless to assist. One misstep, and she would be flung into the sea. She reached the console and entered the emergency code, hands trembling. Nothing. The system required a second confirmation key. She slammed the override panel, shouting into her mic, "I need code verification. Danner now." 3-2 Alpha 4, his voice crackled back. She entered it. The lock engaged. Massive bolts drove into place with a deafening clunk, and the crane froze in place, wounded but upright. She collapsed beside the panel, breathing hard, her soaked clothes clinging like a second skin. Back in the control room, Danner exhaled. He looked at the team around him, all eyes trained on the monitors. "We're not out of it yet," he said, "but we've got a fighting chance." Down below, Hale and Thompson finished their second patch, sealing the secondary leak. The floor was still slick with brine, but for now the flow had stopped. Hale activated his transponder. "Leaks controlled," he reported, "but that weld won't hold another hit. She's buckling." "Understood," Danner said. "Fall back. Prepare for containment in the next sector." The system lights flickered again. No one moved. The storm was still raging. But so were they. The storm's fury had not abated, but something had shifted aboard the platform. The crew, bruised, soaked, and bone-tired, was no longer reacting in chaos. They were responding like a singular organism, each member anticipating the next move, tethered by necessity, forged by crisis. Every creak of the steel structure, every siren that blared, seemed to pull them tighter together. Cole Danner stood at the helm of the operations center, staring at a simulation of structural load points. His jaw clenched, hands gripping the console edge. The stress on the western leg of the rig had reached 94%. If it passed 96%, the leg could shear. If that happened, they wouldn't have hours. They'd have minutes. Sarah Kent returned from the upper deck, her face pale and slick with sweat and salt water. "The manual override held," she said, catching her breath. "Crane's locked down." Danner gave her a nod, but there was no time for thanks. "We've got another problem." He tapped the screen, where a pulsing red outline flashed over the western stabilizer support. It was designed to absorb vertical motion from the waves. Now it was cracking under the horizontal pressure of rogue swells. "The stabilizer dampers are near failure. We either transfer load or we lose a leg." Marcus Hale, freshly returned from the flooded lower compartments, was already out of his rig gear, rubbing the salt from his eyes. "If we redistribute ballast to the eastern tanks, we can take pressure off the west leg." But we'll list, Sarah said. Hard. Better a controlled tilt than a total collapse, Hale replied. We've already got minimal margin on the structural integrity of that leg. Another impact, and we go sideways fast. Danner didn't hesitate. Do it. Begin the transfer. As Hale keyed in the commands, the rig began to shift underfoot, almost imperceptibly at first. But then came the groaning, steel flexing as thousands of tons of mass redistributed across ballast tanks deep beneath them. On the monitors, the angle of tilt adjusted, 1.5 degrees, then 3. Then it held steady at 4.2 degrees. The tension in the room was electric, like holding breath in the eye of a hurricane. Sarah watched the stabilizer monitor. The stress numbers stopped climbing. It's working, she whispered. Hold it at that angle. Don't overcorrect, Danner warned. We stabilize too fast and we'll stress the other legs. And then, finally, for the first time in nearly 30 hours, the storm began to show signs of retreat. The wind speed dropped below 80 knots. Rain still hammered the windows like a war drum, but it had softened, thinned. The wave heights, once towering above the deck, began to shorten. Still deadly, but now manageable. It was a fragile victory, nothing more than borrowed time. But aboard the rig, it felt like oxygen returning to starved lungs. In the crew quarters, exhausted workers took shifts, sleeping in rotations of 3 hours. Some, still too wired to rest, quietly sat in common areas watching old news broadcasts or listening for new orders. There were bruises and sprains, one broken collarbone from a fall in the machine room, but no lives lost. And in a storm like that, it was nothing short of a miracle. Sarah and Danner sat in silence in the briefing room, a pot of lukewarm coffee between them. Neither touched it. They were watching the outside feed from a camera mounted near the helipad. The sea was still churning, but the waves no longer threatened to consume them whole. We were 2 minutes from catastrophe, Sarah said softly. Danner nodded. Maybe less. What held us together? He didn't answer immediately. He watched the gray horizon for a long moment before speaking. Trust and grit, she gave a tired smile. That's not in the manual. Nothing worth learning ever is. A static-laced voice crackled through the wall intercom. It was the radio operator on the upper deck. Sir, we've established contact with the response ship. They're 12 hours out, weather permitting. Danner stood. Tell them we'll still be standing when they get here. The crew spent the next few hours inspecting damage and securing weakened structures. Welding crews moved like surgeons, sealing every crack that could widen with the next swell. In the engine room, diagnostics were rerun, reviewed, and rerun again. Redundancy had become religion. And through it all, no one complained. They'd seen the worst of the sea, and the platform had survived. Not because it was indestructible, but because it was manned by people who refused to break when the storm demanded surrender. By nightfall, the sky began to clear. Not fully, but enough to let the stars punch tiny holes in the dark. Sarah stood on the catwalk overlooking the lower deck. The smell of fuel and salt was strong in the air, but for the first time, she noticed something else. Silence. No alarms. No screaming steel, just the hum of generators and the rhythm of waves finally tamed. Danner joined her, leaning on the rail beside her. We'll need a full structural audit once they bring the chopper in. I'll start drafting the report. Put this at the top. Crew held the line. Platform held because of them. She looked over at him. You don't strike me as sentimental. I'm not, he replied. But facts are facts. And in the aftermath of monster waves, a battered oil rig, and near-catastrophic systems failure, that was one fact everyone could agree on. The storm had tested them all, and they'd passed.